So for group study, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because that's a kind of a different thing, you know. Group study is more we're coming together, just kind of talking about our practice and kind of just studying together. So you guys have heard plenty about the challenge I was navigating. Well, it looks like I've, kind of navigated past that particular thing, so that's kind of gone now. And when a similar situation resurfaces, the the code is pay attention to learn, pay attention to remember what I've learned so that I can act on it when the next time comes. So I had a challenge, I adapted to it, and hopefully, hopefully, I learned from it. And then so when a similar challenge pops up for me, I'll be able to navigate it even more efficiently and effectively. Or if this pops up for someone else, if they ask the right questions, I can offer advice on, maybe some of the things I did and potentially some of the things that they could do to help with whatever. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Ida. All right, so this is your group study in a manner of speaking. So is there anything you guys would like to get started with today? Anything going on? We talked about the islands. So the island that presents the most challenges typically is the island of the practical. And we call it island of the practical because for all practical purposes, you do need to navigate that island. Unless you have created a little society of one on an island somewhere, then your island of the practical could look much different. I live in Chicago, so my island of the practical can get a bit hectic. But yeah, so where would you guys like to start today? Jean, Ida, Vicky, Lisa, Donna, anything on your mind today? Shayna, what you got? Yeah, Vicky, so the podcast, I talked about how I use my imagination to create islands. And on these islands, I can look at it two ways. One, I can look at it a little bit abstract, and I could say, this is the island of my career. And the key is to, without manipulating and controlling, okay, cool, Lisa. If you have anything, just type it in and we can chat about it. Anything that we're navigating. But really, this is just a way that I've created in my own mind to help navigate the different areas of my life experience. And sometimes these islands can seem really messy, but the more that we practice, the more that we pay attention to the island while we're doing everything else, the more that these islands start to organize themselves. It's a very interesting effect. So, I talked about career. The island of career for me got a little bit, you know, tumultuous. It was like a thunderstorm came across my island or something, and trees were blowing all around, and I have to navigate that. I have to adapt to that. So I adapted, and now my island, believe it or not, career island is pretty darn clear. Like, it's pretty darn organized. Everything is where I want it to be. And so that's one way to look at it, is all the islands on one hand is kind of a mind exercise, a way of looking at something a little bit abstract, right? It's a little bit philosophical. It's a little bit more difficult to work with that concept in the moment while you're navigating something. So that's why I kind of say it's fun, to look at. It can be beneficial, but it is a little bit abstract. The other way to look at the islands is a little bit less abstract, and that's when you're activating your imagination over the present moment. So I use my imagination while I'm interacting with the everyday world, my everyday life experience. One reason is because, according to my theories of everything, imagination is very important. Imagination is an indication of the evolution of the human mind. And these variations of the human being compared to the rest of the life that we see on Earth, and I'm not going to say imagination doesn't exist in any other creature, because that would be wildly erroneous for me to assume that. but it does look more rare. It does look like an evolution of mind, that the more the mind evolves, the more capability it has to do a variety of different things. For the human being, we have humor, we have imagination, we have curiosity. We see curiosity in other creatures for sure, but I view these little aspects as potential aspects of the evolution of consciousness, or the evolution of mind, the evolution of the human brain, body, and spirit working together. And so the islands are just a way for me to interact with my own life experience and to keep things more organized. It's organizing the islands that's the key. So if I had to look at this, I would say that my island of like island of the practical, which is the one that we have to navigate most often, is super messy. Like for a lot of people, it's really, really super duper messy. But with the mindfulness practice, paying attention, not trying to control, non-interference, you can kind of see the islands organize themselves in a manner of speaking. That's something that kind of has to be experienced, but yeah. Does that make sense, Vicky? And that recording is my most recent podcast if you wanted to check that out. Yeah, and when I talk about the islands, I'm not really teaching that. I guess if Gene is like, "Oh, I want to know more about the islands," maybe we could do like a one-on-one, or I could do like a, you know, like a webinar or something. But really, the islands is just something I do with my mind. Gene could do something. He could create the airplanes, and then now he flies in different airplanes depending on different moods. I had a different color dragon flying around me depending on the mood that I was in. That helped me to identify my current mood as it was happening. And then I would change the color of the dragon so it would go towards a mood that I viewed as more beneficial to my experience in the moment. So
It's just uncanny because we just had that conversation. Jean came with me to look at a property in Connecticut yesterday, and it was a beautiful day. We took the ferry over, so we were sitting outside looking out over the water. There happens to be a small craft airport near there in Connecticut, so we saw a couple of small planes come in and out, and Eugene was reflecting back on plane flying experiences and actually the emotion attached to it, and when and how that affected the flight. And he was telling me lots of facts about flying that I find fascinating. My father worked for Grumman, and he built he was involved with the lunar module, and he was involved with the F-14. And so we grew up around, we all worked in Grumman during our summers, when we were in college. So we're an aircraft interested family. And after he told me a bunch of these facts, like, do you know that when, why the birds fly close to the ground? Because when there's less resistance, the air is different where it's close to the ground and it's easier to fly. And, different things that paralleled piloting in a small airplane. And lots of detail. And I found it very interesting, and obviously he does. And then after we spoke, I thought, since imagination is one of the things that he finds the most difficult here in class, it's not a low-hanging fruit technique for him. Imagination is a tough one because it just seems like silly made up, and it doesn't have a practical connection in his mind. That perhaps he could use flying to navigate, when he's doing anything, when we're walking, when we're discussing stuff with the realtor, or when he's doing something with his grandkids, or just in his mind, that could be the technique that keeps his attention on something deliberate. Whereas I see that the winds of the conversation are not good, I could fly lower, or I could come in from a different angle, or just seeing it from a flying perspective, since he has such a interested and knowledgeable database where that's concerned. To apply it to some navigation of a segment would be a good way to use imagination. And I said, I don't do that. I use dragons and stuff like that, which I know he doesn't he doesn't particularly find, he doesn't find applicable to his own life, but I do. And the fact that you just said maybe Gene could use airplanes, but I use dragons, I thought is Funny.
I'd call that an
Actually, I was
acronym.
going to ask you, do you
Yes.
think that that is a good piece of advice or suggestion,
Mhm.
not advice,
Of
a
course I do.
suggestion
Yeah.
for imagination? Yeah.
Especially, there's certain variables, certain little things that if they're in place, then yes, it's absolutely going to work. So if an airplane can remind you of something, so maybe Gene will go back to when he was crashing and how to be calm or as calm as possible, we'll say, in a situation like that is important. Or the more calm we are, to a certain extent, the more we catch flow. And sometimes flow doesn't feel like calm because maybe your body does need to kick in that energy so that you move faster than you normally would, right? So the body and the energy body, they'll kick in and they'll start doing their thing. So maybe Gene could, or whoever could draw that association that, adrenaline will be involved to a certain extent. Adrenaline plus a rowdy mind equal chaos, equal a lot of crashing airplane into the ground and learning nothing. But if Gene or whoever can associate the imagination to the feeling and to the practice, then that will be beneficial because imagination, it's not a habit. You're not habitually used to doing that. And it's not, now here's a catch though, it's not really sensory perception. So we're getting a little bit outside of, I have all these acronyms, sensory attention training. I wouldn't include imagination necessarily in that because if Gene is a psychologist or he's a doctor, he may want to argue that point that you're not really perceiving when you're doing an imagination technique. I could take that a step further if this group is interested in that. I don't want
But I
any,
disagree
yeah,
with that. Isn't that what athletes do before they run a race? And when they actually wire up an athlete, and when
disagree
he's
with what?
imagining himself running the race, his body is experiencing the
Oh, sure.
feelings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what was
so
the disagreement?
that's sensory.
Yeah, but so usually when we use the term sensory attention or sensory input, it's input versus output. And if you're using your imagination to feel warm, that's a form of output. So your body is changing its temperature. You using your imagination is a form of output. So it's output creating different types of output, but you're not really sensing the environment, meaning that you could be in a sensory deprivation chamber and you can still use your imagination. Do you see what I mean? So I'm just making that distinction that it's not necessarily sensing the world around you. It doesn't mean that nothing's happening. Like, of course,
So
imagination,
you're just
yeah,
remembering the sensations of the time and recreating them.
exactly.
You're not
Mhm.
actually feeling the warmth of, you're not holding something warm to feel warm. You're
Well,
remembering what warm
exactly.
feels like.
And so you still may be sensing it because you when I was doing the moxibustion on my feet, just the idea of it was creating heat. So because of my mind's ability to focus, when I started to do the moxibustion procedure on my foot just got hot on its own way before I even put the moxibustion. It's not a cone; it's like a stick next to my foot. So I'm just making that one little distinction. It's actually not that important, because the imagination, depending on where we are in what we're learning here in mindfulness, there's a certain point where imagination will take a very important role in what we're doing. I don't force that, because it can start to seem a little bit esoteric. It could start to seem a little bit, you know, outside of a trick of attention. In the beginning, I don't really interact with imagination much more beyond that. Does that make sense? But yes, Donna, I think the way that we were talking about using our attention with the airplane would absolutely be beneficial, potentially. Gene, were you going to add something? I see you unmuted. Yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say at some point in that experience of the plane crashing, um, at some point, time seemed to be going as it usually does until the accident, until the canopy flew open and those things happened, and then it seemed to me that time changed. I was doing so many things in so much less time. It was if everything had slowed down. Even I slowed down, and there was so much more time. I perceived so much more time than there really was. It seemed like it took a long time to get from 300 feet to the ground. But it wasn't. It was just seconds. But it felt like a very long time. I mean, it felt like minutes. It was nowhere near minutes. It was only seconds, but it felt like minutes. Anyway, I was just going to say I perceive time differently.
Yeah. What's interesting though is that it's perception that creates time. So in some aspects, I use the term time dilation because I don't want to look at it as an abstract thing. That I don't think that's abstract. Now, what we always want to do is compare it to what other people would be potentially seeing. That's how we gain our definition of real. You know, if Jean, Ida, and Donna all agree on the same thing, then we would say that that is a part of reality, or it's real. It's a part of our shared experience. Now, would anybody else have experienced time as you were? No, because time is relative to the observation of causality. Your observation changed because you were in very, very close, if not in an energetic state of flow where there was no mind getting in the way. And if it's life or death, the body will override the little things, the little blockages of energy flow that you've created, or the little plugs that we create from our lifestyle. Your body will totally override that shit in if it's a matter of life and death.
When eventually I got to the ground and I spoke to people who observed it happening. So I was in the plane doing what I was doing, and they were on the ground looking up, watching it. They said it took about between 5 and 10 seconds for the whole event to occur. And I was in the middle of the event, and it didn't feel anything like 5 to 10 seconds. It was a long time. It felt like a long time to me. And so I remember thinking to myself, well, it's interesting. They're on the ground looking up, and it was 7 seconds, and it passed in a flash to them. But it didn't do that for me. It was a very long time. Spent a long time in the process.
And so some of this I would start to kind of say the energy body, and I use the term energy body so that I'm not taking something infinite and trying to compartmentalize it. I can do that with pens and pencils and physical things. I can categorize, compartmentalize concepts, words, all of those things. I can compartmentalize, separate, organize. That is impossible with spirit. Spirit's felt. Spirit is something a little bit different in our experience. And when we start to compartmentalize it or anything like that, we end up with something like the spirit of the mountain represents the unmovable force of will. And it's like, okay, yeah, I guess, it's just a mountain. So sometimes the way that the energy body works, if I were really to just give my heartfelt analysis, in that moment, there was no real room for extra cognition, in a life or death situation. And then the energy started to flow, and then the energy body started to use its intelligence. It's an intelligent thing. It's not a desire thing necessarily. It's more of an intelligence. And that energy body took over and slowed time down necessary to do what it needed to do. If you were in a different scenario where there's no buttons to push, there's no, you're not navigating, maybe a car is starting to turn, it can speed time up. And then you wake up in the hospital, and you don't remember what happened. So sometimes the energy body is working in cahoots with the brain and trying to do what's most beneficial for you in that moment, whether it's speeding time up or slowing time down.
It's a very interesting thing. It's happened to me a couple of times.
Mhm.
Remember being the passenger in a car that lost control and headed towards the side of the side of the road, the shoulder of the road, full of trees. And I knew that. I knew it didn't happen, but I knew in my brain, my reality was we're going to hit something at any point. And I was wondering, I was like, oh, this is going to be the first time I'm in a major accident.
Mhm.
So I wonder what I didn't know whether to pick my legs up or keep my legs down. You know what I mean? Like tighten up in a ball. Because I was in the passenger seat and I was going to get the brunt of it. And whether I was going to feel, I remember thinking, I wonder if I'm going to feel the car hit me or I am going to hit the car. Like I was really analyzing how the impact was going to feel to me when it happened, and it didn't happen. But boy, I had a lot of time to think about it, I thought, and it really was a matter of seconds.
All right, so I'm trained. I heard a beeping. I need to go refill my coffee. I'll be right back. Classical conditioning. I heard a coffee.
No, it was mine.
Okay, be right back. Give me 1 second.
It happens in nursing emergencies also. When I'm in a real emergency as a nurse, in a critical situation where everybody's doing lots of things, the time slows down. The ability to observe what's happening and what to do about it and analyzing what it is, what body system, what's happening, what I need to intervene to prevent it from getting worse, that kind of thing. Time slows a lot when that happens.
Of course, it was Einstein who had the clever little paragraph for us to remember this principle, but touch a hot pan and a second feels like an hour, touch a hot woman and an hour feels like a second. I use that principle romantically too to slow time down because it's like, well, I don't want this to, be 1 second. I want it to be, I really want to dig into it. And I wanted at least 3 seconds. Yeah. Like, can I at least have 3 seconds of this? And maybe 2 seconds of hot pan. Can we move that along a little bit? Yeah. I will say though that when you read my book, I do talk about because I wanted something to be new for you all as well. So I didn't want this book to just be completely review for everybody. Although it's told in that two-person dialogue, so it's told like a story, I do talk about the energy body and what I view as, I think it's one of the most important things for human species to do is to activate their energy body. I believe that if we don't do this, the human species will not evolve beyond a physical form, beyond the physical body. Does that make sense? And I have like years and years of reasons for thinking this too. So, observation and just looking at different things. But
Yeah,
so
I think
yeah,
it's another thing that the indigenous people did all the time.
and we're born doing, the what is that child laughing at? What are they smiling at? What are they looking at? You know, so sometimes because when we come into the world, we have no context. We have no memory. We have no, well, I'm not going to say we have no memory, but we haven't formed memories from experiences in the womb yet, So, and even if we have, that has no context, no contextual reference to the outside world. So when we come out, it is my guess that the world looks a lot like my background. Despite our eyes working, it's all just a blur. It's all just like, I don't know what any of this is. So I can't really make an association to it. So it's difficult to place that into a type of memory that we can recall. So how else did we interact with our environment and how else did we learn and how else did we do all of these things if our mind and our brain and everything isn't developed? We have no contextual reference. We have no, according to scientists and doctors, we were born without instinct as human beings and all of that. So what's really going on? And I kind of have that narrowed down to the energy body as a type of intelligence and a connection. That's the human being's connection to the infinite, is that seen and unseen bridge. And I call that bridge the energy body. To avoid using words like chi, because that's borrowed from the Chinese, and I don't want to use prana because that's borrowed from other traditions. So I'm just going to use the most generic term I can use, and that's energy body, the unseen aspect of you and me and everybody else. And for the most part, unseen can also mean immeasurable, which could make science a bit tricky. So yeah. All right, so we have Jerry here, we have K Galaxy here. Anything going on in your week? Anything going on in your experience that we need to talk more about the mindfulness practice, why we're doing this? I would say that at a certain point in a person's practice, if they're asking these questions and they want, me to answer questions or anything like that, imagination becomes critical to this process, because it's the imagination that activates the energy body for us. It reactivates it. It helps us get back into it, if that makes sense. So it goes from Gene imagining airplanes to forms of imagination occurring that he had never seen before, heard before, thought of before, and then they just start to occur when he needs it. And that shit can get very difficult to explain to other people. And when we try, we end up with poetry, books, paintings and music and all that kind of stuff as well. But I do believe it as, which is one of the reasons I continue. I definitely felt like I found a stopping point uh, to where I felt like I've offered a lot, and there's a lot that people can do with this and improve their life experience. And if enough people will do it, then the world could be a more, not like earnest, but a more focused place, where the mind is a tool, it's in its proper place, but I continue because I actually think that there's a little bit more that needs to occur. It might occur naturally. In fact, I think it could, but I don't see anything wrong with kind of spurring that along if people are asking the right questions. So eventually imagination will become a key component to feeling into the body. So feeling into the body is when it begins, though. And that doesn't really require imagination unless you can use imagination to help you feel into the body. And now you're really cooking. Now you're using imagination, you're sensing into your physical body, and doing that long enough, that's it. All you need is attention. You don't need to try. Gene doesn't need the compendium of activating the energy body. Donna doesn't need to travel to some island to speak to some esoteric master who's going to put frog juice into a lobe in her brain or something like that. Like we don't need to do that. You can, if that's what floats your boat and you find that interesting and you trust this person who's using frog juice on your body. Frog juice. Yeah, Gene, go ahead.
Okay, so to steer this in, and I know you will steer it in whatever direction you think might be appropriate. In my practice, I end up being in places where I find the practical island. The practical island, in my case, that I trip over often, and I'm having issues with, is it's related to engaged in somebody else's business. Seeing someone else, in my case, and a good friend of mine, suffering. I see him suffering, and I find myself wanting to help, being supportive in some way. And the task at hand for me is demanding. It requires lots of my attention in order for me to feel like I'm making a difference. I'm helping him in some way, providing him some tools to get over whatever he's dealing with. And I find what happens to me is two things. One is I get down on myself because I don't feel I'm doing enough. And this is a good friend of mine, and how can I let him suffer like this without doing something about it, or trying to do something about it, or giving more of myself? And on the other hand, it's exhausting. I find it exhausting to pay that much attention, to devote that much time to trying to help him feel, to negotiate his islands, and my other islands become neglected, and the majority of my time is spent at least in my head often, but often my own physical time is spent trying to attend to help this person. And I feel compassion isn't a friend at a time like that. It's draining. And I trip on that. I find I trip on that. And trying, focusing on putting my attention on a deliberate point is contrary to my intention, which is to pay attention to what his problem is and see if I can help. If I focus on the skies, shadows, I don't find I'm making more space to resolve. It's a control thing. I see that. But I find if I try to engage the practice the way I see the practice, I'm not paying attention to my initial concern, which was his well-being and how I can help. And I get stuck there a lot.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess one of the first things I would want to talk about is just this theory that I have called non-interference. And there's a lot of reasons why that is so important to me. And there's a reason why I share the theory of non-interference, because we live in a world where everybody is trying to fix everybody. We're using words like healing. I'm going to heal you, or this is healing energy, and this is healing and healing and healing. And it's like, all right, shit, like I'm always sick, apparently, because I constantly need healing. Like my entire life experience is healing. What is this? It just doesn't make any sense to me. So number one is my advice would come from that theory, is the theory of non-interference. And I can tell you where some of that theory comes from. And then to cross the bridge between, the theory of non-interference and doing it is the rule of three, the voice of power. So first of all, one of my questions would be, is this person asking you questions? Are they saying, Gene, what do you recommend? What should I do with my mind? So that's kind of just a distinction that I would need to know. If they're asking questions, we answer the questions the best we can that are asked. So if somebody comes up to me and they're like, Ernest, what can I do about bad dreams? Well, they've asked me a very specific question about bad dreams. Well, I can give you some information about bad dreams, and I can give you Gene's experience about bad dreams, and then I can share my experiences about bad dreams, and that's knowledge. That's all I can share. I have nothing else. I can't do it for you. I can't convince you. I can't change your mind. And I don't even want to, right? Because, well, there's a lot of reasons, and I can kind of give that story of kind of where I learned that from. But so those are some of the things. Are these questions being asked? If not, I am interfering. So if I can see that Donna doesn't feel well, I might ask, how you feeling? And then she might say, I feel shitty. And that's it. Well, okay. Well, I'm not even going to apologize. Like, I'm not even going to say, I'm sorry that you feel shitty. Compassion is already there because I care. I care about Donna enough to ask, but I also care enough about Donna to let her drive her own ship, to walk her own path and her own journey. It's erroneous for me to assume that anything I'm going to say, number one, she wants to know, or number two, she's, and I'm going to put this in air quotes, ready to know. By ready, if I'm asking the questions, then I'm ready to know. You know what I mean? If I'm not asking these questions, you may just be giving me information that is literally going to go in one ear and out the other. Now you're wasting your time, you're wasting my time, and we're using energy in the process, and that can feel very deflating. It can feel like it's using a lot of energy. So one of the great examples is Carlos Castaneda, and Carlos Castaneda with Don Juan. And they're at that restaurant, and there are kids picking up scraps of food. And so if Gene and Donna were dining and having lunch when they get up, these kids are going to come and they're going to eat the rest of their food and clean up the table. And, they're eating scraps. And Carlos is like, oh, I feel so sorry for them. Like, I wish I could help them. I wish I could. And Don Juan just said that is completely erroneous. You don't know which one of them down there are all of a sudden going to learn from this experience and become a person of power, step into their own personal power. Your interference could actually prevent that. No matter how much you think you're helping, if you're interjecting something that wasn't asked for, you're interfering with their natural flow of things. And there's a lot of reasons for that. We care about people. We don't want to see people in pain and suffering. But there were times in my life that if I time traveled and went back in time and told past Ernest not to do this, I'm going to give you advice that you didn't, I'd be like, other than the whole time travel thing, which was pretty cool, you can fuck off. Like, I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna go do what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna learn from it. And the thing is if I had changed any of that, if I went back in time and changed anything that I did, how do I know I would have arrived with the mind that I have now? It could have altered everything, and then I just end up at a completely different point. The reason I mention this is because that's the purpose of non-interference. You put your own ego aside because you're not going to assume you can help the person. You're not going to assume that you have the right thing to say to that person to make it all better. But when they start coming to you with questions, you just answer in the best way that you can based on your experience, your information, your experience that you can share from other people, and your own personal experience. And then if they've asked that question, they're probably going to remember it a little bit longer. They may even work with it a little bit. And then they're like, oh, and then they'll come back and they're like, gee, and I did this rule of three thing that you said. I redirected my mind and my attention and I did feel better. Why did that work? There's your opportunity to tell them why it works, because he asked the question. Do you see what I mean? So sometimes we relate compassion with interference and trying to change other people. So let's say somebody's going through a divorce. Everybody always wants to say, oh, I'm so sorry, like, I'm sorry this is happening. And it's like, why would you say that? You're saying that because you're taking your opinion, your view of marriage, your view of how things should be, and you're imposing that on me. Maybe this divorce was the best thing for both of us. Did anybody ever think of that? Like, maybe it's not a I'm sorry thing. Maybe it's a congratulations that you both figured some shit out about yourselves and you're doing things a little bit differently. It's not a I'm sorry or anything like that necessarily. But as human beings, we just get lost in this trap of thinking that we know things for people. You don't. They're their own, they have their own energy body, they have their own connection to the infinite, they have their own mind. And and it can get very difficult, especially like when it's our kids, that's going to be the trickiest one. When it's our relatives, that gets super tricky because we have a stronger connection to those people. Somebody comes up to you off the street and they ask you a question, you'll answer it, but you might not consider it much more after that. Your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad or your child, they ask that question, you may think about that all day because you really care about them. The connection between you and that person is more firmly established. The connection leads to a type of attachment, and that type of attachment leads to a type of clinging and an attempt to control and manipulate. And then before you know it, you're trying to tell everybody else how to do things. You're trying to tell everybody else how to live, and you're trying to get up on your soapbox. And I'm not saying you would do this, Gene, but this is something that can occur, is that now we're on our soapbox and we're like, this is the way, the truth, the light, come unto me. And it's like, now what are we really talking about? So I think the best thing is to wait for questions, and then also to inspire by doing your practice even more in the presence of the other. Does that make sense? It doesn't sound like the rule of three was being activated. You kind of see that you're going into a pattern, Gene. You kind of see that this is going into an area. You felt it. You feel the draining. You feel that he's probably not even really listening, because nothing's changing. So maybe he is, I don't know, but a lot of times if they're not asking the questions, they're not going to do it. They're not going to remember it. They're not going to take it with them throughout the day, which is what we're doing. So, yeah.
I'd like to say, I don't want to make this all about this situation. However, I understand and I hear what you're saying, and I don't think that's the case in this case. He is asking. He does ask. I get phone calls, 3 or 4 a day, and they're panicky calls about come to my house, let's spend some time together, let's go play pool, let's go have lunch, let's do this, let's do that. He's having a difficulty being alone, being by himself, and he can't seem to find a solution to that. And he's looking to me to be that for him, and asking me to do things that I'm not particularly interested in doing. So my problem becomes, yeah, he's suffering, and when I say suffering, I'm not using the word loosely. Truly suffering. I can see his suffering. He's suffering, and asking me to intervene somehow to make it better somehow. He has no idea how. I have no idea how. But let's spend more time together, because when we're together, I feel better. That's what he says. When we're spending time together, I feel better. When I don't have anyone around, I'm suffering. So he does ask. He doesn't ask a specific question. He's begging, it seems to me. It sounds to me for help, begging for help. And I don't think I'm equipped to provide it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if that's the case, what I would recommend doing is finding one little thing that you can continue to reiterate. You know what I mean? Rather than giving dissertations, rather than, going into all of the this and the that and the other thing, kind of highlighting one thing that a person could do that if they try, they'll feel it and maybe it will lead to something else. You could also lead them to a class. You could lead them to a one-on-one if you think it would be beneficial, that type of thing. I would say that those resources are there. These are free, so if a cost is an issue, just the free group study can be beneficial. One-on-ones aren't free, but they are pretty inexpensive. I've lowered rates and everything like that. And then I think that soon there'll be other people who can do this with us as well. So soon we'll have a little bit of a help network that you can kind of refer people to. But in these cases, Gene, I would do my best to, number one, make sure that my practice is active at all times while interacting with this person. That's the key. Because if you do that, a lot of the questions that you have will be answered for yourself. You'll feel a better way to interact, or maybe you'll just be inspired to say, I'm just being honest with you right now. I don't want you to take this personally, but some of the things, I don't really want to do these things, so that type of honesty, if it's in the right setting, if the energy, the connection, the flow, you can get away with that type of, it's just how, if you premeditate it and try to plan it, it's probably going to come out clunky and he's going to get offended. And then, so that's not what I'm recommending. Flow can really reveal a lot. How do we get in flow? You're going to have to rule of three. So you're going to have to, settle into the moment with your practice. And when you see your mind going a direction that is perpetuating the things you don't want, then the rule of three can come in. And one of those aspects to the rule of three is the voice of power. So I've learned I can't be responsible for others' feelings, although difficult at times. That could become a mantra. That could be something that we remind ourselves of in the moment when these things start to occur. You see what I mean? So for example, when the woman comes into the dispensary and she's having a fit, she's cussing at me, she's saying everything about a man, like it was a male assault. What did I tell myself? Anything you say will make this worse. Just relax, just be calm. So that's the mantra I start to say in my mind so that I can navigate this situation in the way that would be the most inspired, or I'll learn from it because I'm really checking in and paying attention. So this is a difficult thing, and a lot of it is going to be reminding yourself so that you don't go down those paths that don't benefit, because you even mentioned like you start to get down on yourself now. Now that's you. That's something that you're doing to yourself that you can rule of three, redirect, and kind of navigate out of that. And the more that you do that, so I have Donna coming over, and every day she's coming over to have tea, and more often we're talking about her problems, the things that are going on with her and all of that. And so I see my mind starting to complain, I see my mind starting to do this and that, and then I'll start to redirect, I'll start to use my rule of three, and then I can talk about this more. I want to look at Vicky's question or comment, but I do also have a thing that I call personal principles. And personal principles can be a way to establish boundaries. I had this in an interview and she said, well, how do you establish boundaries for other people? And I said, I don't. I don't even know what you're talking about. How can I establish a boundary for another human being? I don't say, Gene, this is your boundary. Donna, this is your boundary. I say, this is mine. This is my circle. If you come in it, I will respond. I'll bob, I'll weave, I'll move, I'll remove you if necessary. You see what I mean? That's my boundary. So a boundary can be established with the voice of power by reminding yourself, going back into your practice. So, you know, if Donna, every single day she's complaining, and I have this boundary set, there very likely will come a time where I'll say, Donna, you know, have you noticed, you know, the way that you're talking, that the way that you're talking is, it doesn't include solutions, it doesn't include new ideas, it's almost always about other people, and you're almost always complaining. And Donna may get offended, she may not. I don't know. I can't control that, you know. She may no longer be my friend anymore. I don't know. I can't control that. But I'm being honest. You know, I'm not coming from a place of wanting, so my intention is good. So when I look back on this and I'm like, all right, well, where was my mind? Where was my energy? My intention was pure. My heart was open, my energy was flowing, I wasn't annoyed, I was into my practice, and I said what I said. And now I need to learn from that and navigate from that and continue to go on. But some of this will come down to the voice of power. We do have to remind ourselves of some of these things because the world isn't doing this. The world is trying to cure you. They're trying to help you. They're trying to tell you what to do with yourself. And they may not be wrong, you know, I don't know. But if I'm not asking the questions, it's going to go in one ear and out the other anyway, because I'm not in that receptive mode. I'm not creating that space for new information to find its way in, if that makes sense. So my recommendation would be, in those situations, your practice is even more pristine, and a way to interact with other human beings and maintain your practice. When I look at a person, I'll use defocused vision so I see all of them. When I'm listening to a person, I will close caption them if I really want to pay attention. So Jean, if you were talking to me and I felt like I really needed to pay attention, you were teaching me something, I will imagine your words. I'll imagine them visually because I'm a multi-learner. I don't have one way of learning. People say that to me all the time. They're like, what's your way of learning? What? Which way do you learn best? All of them. Put them all together. That's the way I learn best. Throw something visual, throw something auditory, and throw something with words, and then put me in a situation that I can do that all at once. I don't see why we need to break this all up. I want all of it. If I can only do visual, I'll learn visual. If I can only do auditory or audio, I'll only do audio. But if you can put those all together, I'm going to learn better because I'm using more sensory perception than I was before. And I view that as the principle, not I learn better this way or I learn better that way. Please put them all together because I'll learn better with all of them in cahoots rather than one or the other. Does that make sense? So you'll kind of be able to feel these situations out. Your practice needs to be in place. Your rule of 3 needs to be in place so there's no leaking power. Otherwise, you're not going to help them anyway. And then it's really important to ask the questions or answer the questions that are being asked. And if they're not answering or asking questions, try to stick to one thesis because it could take years for a person to even get that one thesis through their mind. For example, you are not just your thoughts. That could take somebody a decade to fully like, oh my God, thoughts are happening. I'm creating them. I'm not it, right? Is that helpful, Gene? Okay. And then that would be across the board for any situation. And it will be that way with our kids. The more you interfere, the more you're breaking this dynamic up. You're taking the power out of their own energy body, their own hands, their own capability. Does that make sense? And before you know it, it leads to all kinds of strangeness. It's easy to get high off of helping others. True, for sure. Especially that high is almost always going to be fueled by the feeling first and then the thoughts. We start to allow these thoughts of what we're doing and things like that. That's for sure. especially when you see your input is making a difference. Absolutely. Slippery slope and becoming a healer. If you watched me, Vicky, throughout like what I've been doing, I slipped on that slope many times because I've never done this before. And people are telling me, "Oh, Ernest, you need to do it this way, and you have to get out there, and you have to use these words, and you need to be this active, and you need to be on all of these social medias and putting yourself out there." And I'm like, I don't wanna. I don't wanna. So I also was navigating that slippery slope, and I do agree that you start to get into your own mind, you start to think about these things. And one of the things though is that when we're doing, like I'm doing this group study, I'm talking. So, I am using some of the things that we talk about redirecting in a manner of speaking. That this isn't, hopefully this isn't repetitive, habitual, which I don't think it is because my practice is active. But I completely agree. I think it is absolutely essential to dissolve these roles that we have divided, that we have teacher, and you guys have seen me do that. This is a group study. I am not a teacher. I'm leading the group study because I just have a little bit more experience in this practice, very likely than the rest of the group. In 10 years, maybe Gene will have his own small group of friends that come together and he leads that group just because he's the most experienced. Now, if he starts saying, you need to call me teacher, I am Guru Gene, I would say that he is slipping on that slope pretty profusely and that he needs to get a grip. Does that make sense? But yes, I think it is very helpful to dissolve these roles, and the way to dissolve them is right here. It's our own mind, our own way of thinking, because 10 times out of 10, when we're acting this way, there are thoughts driving the behavior. And that's why it's just so important for me to emphasize I am not better. I am not a master of anything outside of myself. I do believe that slowly but surely I have become the master of my own cognition. I have become the master of my own mind because nothing is going on without my attention. And it's not always inspiring. Like I'll see myself do something and I'll just be like, I'm retracting that. If you don't mind, I'm just going to take that on back because I'll say a word or something and I'm like, wait, no, I didn't crush it. I did a really good job. I don't have to use a violent term to describe doing something well. I didn't destroy it. I didn't kill it. I didn't murder it. I just did well, right? So I'm watching, it's cognitive attention training. I'm watching my own mind and catching those things. Because heaven forbid I step up on a soapbox and start telling people what they should and shouldn't do. I don't care how much money I make from that. I'll never do it. Which is why, I'll start doing something and then I'll be like, this doesn't feel good. And then I'll do something else. To other people, it will look like Ernest doesn't know what he's doing because sometimes I don't. Like, I've never done this before. Like, I'm just doing it the way that I feel the most authentic. And getting up and telling people that they should do, they shouldn't do, it's all a violation of personal principle, boundaries that I have set for myself. I feel like when we do get into a group study, if nobody's asking questions, I'll start to spur things along. I think that's appropriate. We've all come here for a reason. So I'm not just dropping by Gene's house at 3 p.m. to tell him about himself when he didn't ask, just dropping by. Hi, Gene, just want to tell you about your practice and like what you need to be doing with yourself. That's why I don't use the terms life coach. I don't, and again, I don't want to declare war on those terms either. If another person feels authentic doing that, that's them. That's their garden, that's their energy, that's their sphere of whatever they're creating, and it's not my business. But one thing that you may notice is, and then I'll get to Donna's question, is the mind creates the other, the attachment and the clinging to the other, and that comes from the attachment and the clinging to self. Gene's not doing that. So Gene is looking at himself and he's saying, well, I don't feel qualified. I don't feel capable to offer all. That's a sense of humility, so that's a sense, and I don't think it's leaking power necessarily if that's how he feels. If he just feels like, I don't feel this is in my ethical scope of what I should be talking about right now, I think that's perfectly appropriate to say, hey, I don't feel comfortable. And I've done that. You know, I've done it where people are, what should I do with my energy and my dreams? And I'm like, I don't feel comfortable talking about this with you right now because it's not going to go back to the third pillar. We're just going to start talking about ways to manipulate dreams. And I don't do that. I don't manipulate my dream. I don't control even my dream state. So does that make sense? So great conversation about control, about really when we start to, a lot of the thinking is about self, and then that will lend to the thinking about other. Attachment to self creates the construct and the attachment of another person. The more you start to break up I, the more you start to break up they, but you never really break up we. We stays there. We are a species together. And so we doesn't really go anywhere because that's a dynamic that you can't really escape unless you go to planet X where there's no human beings. But I'd still digress and say you're a part of we. In a manner of speaking, you're still a human, and so am I. So you're a part of the we. But the they and the I are our story, our construct of self. Does that make sense? And then Donna, yes, question.
First, I wanted to reiterate what you just said about, Jean and I have the same mom. So she she had Alzheimer's, and her trajectory was one of a person with Alzheimer's. And during that, she had a lot of suffering. She also had other physical ailments that caused her pain. So during that time, it is difficult to see someone you love suffer. That's just a difficult thing. It's a challenging thing. It requires it requires a state of mind that is exactly what you explained. There is an I and a them, and there's always the we. There has to be some level of acceptance of what is, and then navigate. Otherwise, you suffer together and you both decline. And so you have to bring as much of yourself in alignment to each moment. And then you find you can affect positively the experience. The other person does feel the positive effect of your energy body. But it's challenging to do because you can get caught up in the, let me try this, say you better, or let me try this, and you try to get other people to help you to try this and try that. And so yeah, it's very difficult to explain to how to do that. And I think just my nursing experience and as the youngest and female child, my mother and I were very close, spent a lot more actual time together in life than Jean and she did, just because that's the way our lives went. So it was easier for me to walk through that with her and my family than it was for him. So the compassion is the same, and the empathy is from her. She taught us that, but suffering along with them is something that it's hard to explain, and you did very, very well at that. It's like anything. This is when your practice becomes the most beneficial to you, and then therefore to everybody else, because your alignment is the place from which you navigate better. You have better words. You come up with more creative solutions. You're not searching. You're not frantic about it. And that level of acceptance is another one. This is their journey. This is their trajectory. And you can only influence it by being in alignment yourself. The question was, you were talking earlier about when you say something or when you do something or when something is suggested to you and you say that no, I don't want to do that. It's not in alignment with where I'm at right now or what I want to do. Other than from a feeling standpoint, I know when I'm saying certain words like crushing it or killing it, or, oh, that breaks my heart. My girlfriend grabs her chest, puts her hands on her chest and said, oh, it breaks my heart when I said, you got to stop saying that phrase. Like, it's just what you say that phrase. I know she didn't ask and I intervened, but that's just, my Italian. This is my friend and I can tell her shit. It moves you. It moves you when you see that. You feel it's a heartfelt thing when it's not breaking your heart. It doesn't break your heart. Nothing breaks you. It's not breaking you. It's an outside thing and you're observing it and you have a feeling about it. That's it. And but I can feel, and it took a while of practicing. I can feel when it's not the right thing for me at that time. Maybe a week ago, I couldn't feel that it was the right thing. Maybe I wouldn't notice the words coming out of my mouth and how they were adding resistance instead of, it's not declaring war on the words. It's choosing the words that best express the intention you want to have, and one that resembles your understanding of your alignment as best you can at that moment. But how do you know the difference? How can you tell the difference between, other than what it feels like? Are there any principles involved there that that you have broken down for yourself? How do you know the difference between a thought or a feeling or an action? Like when people say, go on all the social media sites and do all that stuff, and you say, and it doesn't feel good, doesn't align with you, and you say, I don't want to. Other than from a feeling standpoint, how can you discern whether something is a good idea, or you feel motivated to do it, and then later you realize, that was an ego motivated thing and not a inspired thing? How can you tell the difference?
Okay, so how do we tell the difference between something that is potentially inspired from cycles and patterns, and then what is being inspired from, flow, from communication
Yes,
with the
that's
infinite?
the
Yeah.
question.
So when somebody steps up to the dishes and they're like, I don't want to do the dishes because it's just not my field of, I don't want to do it. No, you're just in the habit of talking yourself out of doing the dishes. You would rather be doing something else. And so, you're starting to walk in the mud now, right? Yeah. So it is actually difficult to differentiate in the beginning. And I don't know if you've ever heard me, like I don't generally, when I first start talking about these things, I generally don't go in to just follow the feeling. I don't want to tell someone to follow the feeling when that feeling is very likely still coming from thought patterns, attempting to control, manipulate. So really it really does come with practice. So the more that we practice, the more that we create space. When you're in that space, you can almost feel where things come from too. You can feel whether something is coming from inside of you and going out, or if it's just coming from a thought and going out. You can really see and differentiate the difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I got invited to a party, and now it's getting close to the time to leave for the party. And I go, I don't really feel like going. And I come up with all these reasons why this party is not going to be something I like, and it's really my own social anxiety, or I feel like I haven't seen these people in so long, and now I look old, or there's going to be people there that are a lot smarter than me, or
So there
I don't
is
know.
thoughts though.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's how
but
you can.
the feeling is I don't want to go to this party. And
Mm.
is it an inspired thought of, my time is better spent not engaging in things that I know they'll no longer serve me? Or is it I have some issues that I need to look at square in the face? It's not about whether I go to the party or not. It's what's causing, where is this thought coming from? Is it an inspired thought, or is it a result of habitual repetitive crap?
Well, you already know. I appreciate that you're asking me, like, how do we know? But you already know. I know that you do. I know that you can tell which thought is a part of a repetitive cycle and pattern and which thoughts aren't. So
It's a feeling.
it is a feeling, but you can feel and you can even see the repetition. You can see where it's coming from. You can see that this thought, this idea, this feeling is all coming from a pattern. You can feel the difference now between pattern and flow. That flow, the connection with something infinite. But now,
I guess you're right. I guess it's from the practice that I can go up. There it is. There's the whatever term we use in class, but there it is. Again, I'm repeating something that doesn't serve me.
right. And so this is how I do it. So you asked personally, like personal principles, what do we do? So I'm navigating all of that. So I mean, we will always very likely be navigating something very similar to this. Where is this coming from? Is this coming from years and years and years of trauma, or is this coming from inspired? There's really not that much difference. Like there's really not. It has to do with where our mind is in that moment. So if you want to be able to differentiate between the two, you cannot think that out. Does that make sense, Donna? So if I have a feeling and I feel a little conflict, Ida invited me to a party, and when it comes time to it, I don't really want to. The first step is to get more pristinely into your practice. That's always the first step. Redirecting any words, just going back into the practice, because trying to figure it out isn't a revelation. It's not being revealed to you. The aha isn't coming. And then maybe you're sitting there and then there is the aha that, Ernest, you typically do have fun when you go to these things. You were invited, and after you've cleared your mind, you feel normal. You feel fine. So you can kind of start to differentiate how you feel based on what your mind is doing. And that would be a part of the behavioral change that will come with this practice. Because there's always that question, how can we change our behavior without creating a lesser than or better than, without creating the multiplicity of self, without trying to change? It will all go by feeling, but there's that caveat, the feeling is only trustworthy when your practice is pristine. So if you're trying to figure it out, I can almost assure you that your practice is not pristine. You are violating principles. You're thinking it out. And very likely the words are just, they are the same. You've already thought that before. It's not an aha. It's a question. You're questioning and trying to figure things out in your own mind. Donna is talking to Donna to try to figure out what Donna wants to tell Donna. And you can see the dynamic, right, is a little bit insane. Like, that's, what are we doing, you know? So step one, if we want to evaluate our own behavior, if we want to evaluate what is inspired, what isn't inspired, the practice has to be in place. That's why I wouldn't talk about this in the beginning. Genes, what's inspired? Do you know where your mind is? Can you even answer that? If not, then let's not talk about all this inspired, and where is your mind and did you put it there? If you can't answer that question, we're not going to talk about anything else, because everything is dependent on that step in the first place. So when I have questions, like when I'm feeling like, should I do this? Should I do that? Is this in alignment? Is this not? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And if my practice is in place, then I will feel what is resistance, what isn't resistance. And then maybe I just go do it. And then I learn in the experience as well that you built up resistance from social anxiety. And these things start to reveal themselves to you. The thought will come that this is a social anxious thing. You know, this is something that is a part of old patterns. And you see that. And that's a part of seeing, is seeing yourself and seeing your own patterns. But this is, when I talk about this type of stuff, this is after a certain point in the practice. Do you know what I mean? Like, I would probably only start to talk about this stuff if a person is able to maintain a point of attention throughout the day. If you can maintain a point of attention throughout the day, then you can start to differentiate what's coming from space. And that's ultimately the differentiation. What is coming from space, intelligence, the infinite universe, the fabric of the cosmos, and what is just coming from my habitual repetitive mind. You cannot differentiate the two by thinking. You cannot differentiate the two by trying to figure it out. The only way that this can be differentiated is by feeling, but specifically coming from a feeling when your practice is in place. The practice must be in place to differentiate what's flow, what's not flow. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. I guess it's the same thing. It's always the same thing. It's back to the practice. It just depends on where you are in the practice. It's the same answer as Eugene's question. It's about control and his friend and his wanting to feeling a responsibility to alleviate somebody else's anxiety and to help them when they're suffering. And it was the same thing I just said about how I approached my time with my mother and how come it was harder for Eugene because he wants to fix it. And then from years of nursing experience, I know what's fixable and what's not fixable. I'm just going to try to help smooth the edges of so the bumps aren't so hard.
Mhm.
And really focusing on enjoying the precious moments. And they're the ones I remember. And unfortunately for him, he remembers the ones that were the tough, saddest ones, and I don't engage them. I remember there were a lot of wonderful moments in during that process. So it's just the practice. It really is
Mhm.
just about the practice.
And the trick is in what you emphasize, so what are you emphasizing in this moment? But the behavioral change is definitely something, because this is new. I feel like there's not too many people talking about behavioral change without trying to control, manipulate, because someone would be like, well, how? Like, how can we even do that? It doesn't even make sense. How can I change myself without thinking I need to change? So, I mean, I could give you an example. I used to be called the back out king. Maybe Vicky remembers this because, she's known me for a long time. I would make plans and then I would cancel them. A lot like Donna's saying, maybe I got to the moment and I just didn't feel like doing it. Well, I'm not going to analyze it. I'm just going to do my practice. And in doing my practice, Ida's walking up and she says, hey, Ernest, do you want to get lunch on Thursday? Wait a second. This is it. It's starting now. No, I don't. I don't really want to. Or I don't know. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. If you need set plans, maybe I'm not the person to hang out with. If you're flexible, maybe Ernest is the right buddy to have. So sometimes I also just explain myself because I realize that I put myself at odds with other people. For example, I go to bed at 8 o'clock. So if people want to go out at 8 o'clock, that's not going to work for me. I'm sorry. And I just explain that to people. It's like, this isn't personal. It has nothing to do with you. I go to bed at 8 and you want to start partying at 8. Do you see my conflict? I want to go. I like you and I'm not going to. And over time, people do start to kind of get to know you a little better and they start to accept some of these little quirky things. But I'm not the back out king anymore because number one, I'm present and mindful and I'm aware of my own cognition. And I'm also aware that I don't really like set plans like that unless I need to. Maybe Donna's coming into town from New York, Connecticut, or whatever, and we need to have dinner or lunch or whatever, and fine, I can do that. But in terms of like a lot of social things, I put myself at odds with other people because I interact with my life experience much differently. I don't want to go out drinking. I don't want to expose myself to a lot of electronics and sound and things before bed. I'm me. I'm just doing my thing. And if people can't accept me for me, then they're not my friend anyway. You see what I mean? But if I go back to old mindset Ernest, I was thinking about, I want these people to approve of me. I want this. I want that. It's almost always following an unconscious desire, involving other people, involving acceptance, involving these patterns. And then when I look at it, well, I had that pattern when I was 10. I had that pattern when I was 18. I had that pattern aha, this is a pattern. I can see it. I don't need anybody else to explain this pattern to me. I see it. And since I'm not going to cherry pick, I'm going to sink into my practice. I'm really going to pay attention to it. And then when Ida says, hey, do you want to have lunch on Thursday? Maybe. Call me on Thursday and see what I'm doing. I'll let you know. Rather than the social, oh, I want Ida to accept me. I want her to be, yes, I would love to have lunch on Thursday. Absolutely. Let's invite a bunch of people. And now we have this huge ordeal. And then on Thursday at 9 a.m., I'm canceling because I didn't really want to go in the first place. Now that's a personal example, but the principles are set. Do you see the principles in that example?
Yes, and the principles also involved you learning more about your patterns so
Mhm.
that you can say maybe instead, or you can say, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel. And that's up to the other person to accept that this is sometimes you're able, sometimes you choose to, and sometimes you don't. You're not
Mhm.
the back out king if you don't say, yes, I'm coming and then cancel. Yeah.
And then I still might back out. And I'll tell that person, like, look, I don't feel like it. I'm not going to force myself into a situation. And you learn from paying attention. You pay attention to the moment, you pay attention to how you feel, you pay attention to where is this feeling coming from? Is it coming from my feet and my belly? Or is it coming from this mysterious word-based ether mixy soup that just doesn't feel that great? That's a pattern. That's an attempt to control, manipulate, and all of those other things. So if we want to learn, we have to pay attention. If we want to act on what we've learned, we have to pay attention. In order to pay attention, presence, mindfulness, and deliberate attention. Those are the 3 pillars to maintain the learning mode. You're not learning when you're thinking your own thoughts. If I'm thinking about what I already know, I'm not learning shit. I'm just reciting what I think I know. Most people, when they talk to each other, they're not trying to learn, they're trying to recite what they know or what they think they know. Does that make sense? So it is a really good question. This is one of those things, though, that it really does require a practice. You have to be set in your practice. You have to be doing your practice. And you can learn the feelings of how things are making you feel when you're responding to certain situations, social situations and things like that. If I went way back drinking and things like that, like I just don't like the feeling of collaborating with cannabis all day. I don't. It makes me feel like I didn't, like I'm in a cloud, like I'm just, why did I need this all day? Like, what am I doing? So it's maybe starts to make me feel sluggish or something, I don't want to do that. So I can pay attention to learn about myself. That's the key, is you're getting to know yourself, but you're not going to get down on it. You're not going to necessarily try to change it, because these things are already changing on their own. You remind yourself in the moment of what you want to do. I mean, ask Shayna how the chores are getting done around the house. Ask Shayna about how many towels I'm using, a week. These things are constantly changing, and it's not because I have dedicated myself. No, I get out of the shower and I'm doing my practice and I'm about to throw it in the hamper, and then I'm like, aha, this is my practice. This is my opportunity to put the towel on the thing and reuse it. It has happened, Lisa, but it was a process of moving things around. So like I'm cleaning the room and sometimes you have to make a mess to clean. So yes. But if I got into behavioral change, it would start to sound like bragging, but there's still a lot of behavior that has room to change. I know it. How do I know it? Because I'm so used to paying attention to myself. You see what I mean? So there is a little bit of a caveat to Donna's question, is because the only answer I can give is an empowering answer for you to learn yourself. And if you need me to be an accountability buddy, I can do that. There's so many times that Mike, for example, tells me to call him on his bullshit. I'm not calling anybody on bullshit, but I will tell you the principles as I understand them and can explain them. And that may be in direct contrary to what you just said. So no, I'm not necessarily calling you. So if somebody says, well, I'm doing this, and the practice isn't working. Excuse me? I actually didn't hear anything about the practice and anything you just said. You didn't tell me anything about your presence. You didn't tell me anything about your points of attention to maintain. You didn't tell me anything about your rule of 3. You didn't tell me anything about your mantras. Are you paying attention to your body? Are you paying attention to the world around you? If not, you're not doing this practice. So you can't tell me it doesn't work. How do you know if you're not doing it? This isn't a residual thing. It's not like you do a little bit of practice and then you're residually enlightened. No. In fact, you'll learn more about that in my next 2 books, because the enemies of knowledge, one of them is clarity. You walk around, you start to think you're clear, and you're like, I got this. And that's the moment you slip on ice. Another one is knowledge. That's an enemy of knowledge. Knowledge. And it's like, what the fuck are you talking about, Ernest? How can knowledge be an enemy of knowledge? Before you know it, I'm walking around thinking I got some stuff, in my brain, and I can share this with the world. And then before you know it, there's a construct of Ernest that has this construct of knowledge, and I've just created construct on top of construct on top of construct, and now I think I know some shit. Personal power. Personal power can become an enemy to a person of knowledge. who is, learning to perfect and clarify their own life experience, your own personal power can work against you if your mind isn't present. So, or if you're not feeling peace. I did that a lot. I would do my practice, generate personal power, and then I would go do some willy-nilly bullshit and create suffering for myself and everybody around me. I've learned from that. I still feel the pull sometimes towards these things, and I have to navigate it. I have to go back to my practice. I have to rule of three. I'm not better in this regard. I'm not. Maybe I'm a little bit more practiced, so I remember more often, but that's it. That's the only distinction here, is just the accumulation of the skill from practice. That's it. Does that make sense? So behavioral change is a huge topic. I get it. And I won't talk about it unless we have a practice in place. Otherwise, we're not talking about anything. And before you know it, I'm telling you what you should do with yourself. And that is a violation of Ernest's personal principles. I do not know what's better for another person. I know how to be present, I know how to be mindful, and I know how to access spirit. And when you access spirit, you will learn what's better for yourself. For yourself. Does that make sense? It goes back to we already know. We already have all of this inside of us. We hear this all the time, that the whole universe, or that we already know. Well, you do. But the only way to access that is in a mind that is clear, balanced, powerful. Space is occurring or not occurring. Maybe you're having some aha ideas, but you're not going to cling and attach to them. You might write them down. You might tell somebody. You might just wait for them to reoccur just to make sure that they're important. Do you see what I mean? So if we were in a yes or no, like let's say this was a quiz, okay? So behavioral change requires the evaluation in words of your behavior, true or false? Ah, Donna says false. Jean says true. Okay. So if we want to change our behavior, we have to evaluate our behavior in thoughts and words. That's false. You do not. Because if you're paying attention, you see yourself doing it. That's more powerful than the words. Jean, you could tell yourself right now that you shouldn't tell a lie. That'll ring true to you, right? Right? But then maybe you get into a situation where you think a lie is going to help somebody else, and then you tell that lie. Well, you weren't doing your practice, you weren't present, you weren't, so nothing occurred. Like no behavioral change occurred, nothing has really changed. Your great thought earlier about what you should do sounded great, but it didn't actually manifest into anything because we didn't remember it. It wasn't a part of our practice. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I see that. But, I did analyze it and I thought it would be beneficial. So I did it.
And that can occur. And I don't declare war on that, but it's not necessary. You see, it really isn't necessary. I'm about to tell somebody that I can play the piano because I want them to think more of me. I'm paying attention to myself and I'm about to say it and I'm like, wait a second. You're attempting to manipulate their opinion of you. You're attempting to control how that person views you by saying something that's untrue. Let's go ahead and just retract that, or not say it because I'm present. And the behavioral change just occurred without trying to deliberate on it in advance.
Right. But you did have the thought, right? You did
It could.
recognize it. You saw it when it came up.
Sure. The thought doesn't have to occur the more that you do the practice. So the
thought
feeling
doesn't
occurs.
have to, and the thought doesn't have to occur with a bunch of words and then words to fix it. Sometimes you just notice, look at that, I'm getting angry again, without the words, look at that, I'm getting angry again, or I'm controlling this situation and it's none of my business. You notice it without that stream of words, and then you don't need another stream of words to say how you're not going to do that again. You just do in the moment. You notice and you do. So I think it was a trick question. It doesn't have to come with words and thoughts. It just has to come with awareness.
Awareness, yes. But the words and thoughts could still be beneficial to a certain point, depending on where we are in the practice. There may come a point where the words are just completely unnecessary. You feel yourself about to do something and you're like, whoa, I am cognitively aware. I am behaviorally aware. And none of this is feeling in alignment. And again, these words aren't occurring. You're just feeling this and you just redirect and go another direction. Does that make sense? And that's where the behavioral change. So I'm not thinking I shouldn't place the towel on the bed because that will make it moist and can create, mold and bacteria or make it uncomfortable when you go to, I don't have to recite those things. Maybe I did in the beginning to remember. But then as I progress, as I remember, as I get used to remembering, eventually it's the feeling. I throw the towel on the bed and I'm like, ooh, wait, I just felt that. And so I'll pick up the towel, put it back where it belongs, and that feels better. So it does eventually all go by feeling, but I have to differentiate that that's not reliable in the beginning until we have a practice in place. So there's no point
You
in me
gave the
talking about
example,
behavioral change.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you're good.
You gave the example in class, a podcast, whatever it was the other day about the tree that fell across the sidewalk. And now I can navigate around the tree without having a whole thought stream about it. You can notice the way the leaves look because they're laying on the street and you're seeing it from a different perspective than you have before. But you don't have to go into the whole, boy, this town, it takes them so long to clean up trees. And if they would have just trimmed those trees, it wouldn't have fallen down. And it's not required. But it all depends on, again, where you are in the practice, what you notice and how you navigate. Yeah.
Exactly. None of it's required. And then as you're walking down the path, you see the park ranger. And then you feel inspired to tell the park ranger, hey, tree's down. And now you've solved the problem for other people without trying to control, without trying to manipulate. Or maybe you don't find the ranger, and when you get back, you just make a phone call and you say, hey, a tree's down. Maybe we need to get that out of the way for other people. And if all three of us were hiking, it would look a lot like this. We're walking along the sidewalk, and let's just say Gene and Donna, they're new in their practice. They're going to stop. They're going to be like, oh my God, this is always happening to me. This is terrible. We were having a great day. It was a great walk. And now, meanwhile, Ernest is just going around. And then I end up on the other side, like, what the hell are you guys doing? And they're like, well, what did you just do? And I'm like, well, I went through, around, and underneath, and here I am. It wasn't a problem. I didn't create a problem out of it. I still had to navigate it. You see?
I'd automatically think, gee, what happened? How did it blow down? Did somebody cut it down? Somebody back into it?
Yeah.
That's where I'd go there first.
And even that's not bad. That's not wrong. It's just, where does that go? It's like the initial thought, I wonder if the wind blew. That's curiosity. I think that's fair. You can be a curious, but then when you go in and you start, and you can't let it go, now we're getting into things that are unbeneficial to us. It's all about a balance, so it's not, yeah, I think I've emphasized this balance thing, that we're not trying to eliminate words. We're not trying to eliminate these things. We're trying to find the medium, the balance between the two where all the power is. And so Gene may have a thought that occurs, go around. That's the word. Like that's what you probably should do. And that's great. And the words occurred. To Donna, they didn't. And she just went around. See, so it can be a little bit different just depending on where we are in our practice. And it's a wildly diverse and unique thing to each person, where we are in our practice. It takes the balance off. And I think that I am one of the first that I've seen that are really talking about non-interference, not attempting to manipulate and control even yourself, let alone other people. And the way to do that is to pay attention, learn, adapt, move, all without attempting to control. I went around. I just went around. I didn't control. I didn't attempt to. I just went around the tree. It was in flow. Or I picked the tree up and I threw it. I don't know how I did that. It was just, I did it. And then Gene pushes a tree over and says, do it again. And I can't. It took me out of the flow because I'm trying to figure out how I did it. So a lot of this is we are learning to create the optimal human condition and operate from there, as opposed to creating the cognitive psychological condition and operating from there. Does that make sense? But first we have to get into that space before we can operate from it. The way that I was eating, I went a couple weeks. I wasn't really paying attention to how I was eating. I was feeling that. And so I go to put some toast in the toaster. I'm paying attention and I'm like, you know what? And this isn't with words. I just take the toast out because I realize what I'm doing and I put it back in and I'm like, all right, I don't need toast right now. Or I'm earlier in my practice and the thought occurs, Ernest, you don't need all this bread in the morning. Your body doesn't want that. You remember how it made you feel the other day? And then maybe I include a mantra. I don't need to eat bread every single day at this time or whatever it is, right? And then before you know it, you have modified the way that you eat in a way that feels good to you. I like fasting until noon. I enjoy it. I like the feeling of hunger now. It reminds me I'm alive. It's not the end of the world. I'm a little bit hungry. That's okay. Like it's fine. I don't have to lose my shit because I've gone 15 minutes with hunger pains. It's fine. Probably just need a drink of water anyway. So
Ernest, what was the
So it's,
distinction there? What was the distinction there of instead of cognitive?
it's where we're operating from. So
Okay,
a
actual.
lot of times we're operating from thought, from psychology, from thinking about things and trying to understand and manipulate and control. Like, how much time do we spend trying to understand something? How much time do we spend trying to figure out something? How much time do we spend trying to change something? Or how much time do we spend looking at things wishing they would change? That's an unnecessary dynamic. It may happen, and I'm not going to chastise anybody for it. I may do that, but then I'll quickly redirect it because it's not beneficial for me. So the distinction is, where are we operating from? Is it from space because we're knee deep in our practice? Or is it from a reaction, a response that is coming from suffering? Does that make sense? And if you're having trouble differentiating the two, set up a one-on-one session and I can help you distinguish the two. Accountability buddies aren't a bad thing. And I'll just ask, where was your practice? It wasn't there. 9 times out of 10, if your practice isn't there, where can it be coming from? This is a simple dynamic. If he isn't doing his practice, he is not present, he is not mindful, he is not deliberately intending his point of attention in the moment happening now. Where is everything coming from? He's still doing something. He's not just slumped over like a broken robot. Where's all that coming from then? Where is all that action, all that behavior, all of that thought? Where's it all coming from? That's the distinction, Mike. Does that make sense, that distinction?
Yes.
And now if you tell me I was about to go into the meeting or I was about to go into the conversation and my practice was impeccable, and then all of these things occurred, then now let's kind of talk about that. Like, was your practice really impeccable? And if it was, then what can we do to make it even more flowy, if that makes sense? Create more space for more flow to occur. So I am in the camp of 100% mind. If the mind relaxes, the energy will flow. If the energy flows, we will connect. If we connect, all of a sudden, I'll use myself as I want to exercise. Before, I was trying to force myself into exercise because I wanted to look good, or I thought I should, or I want to be this person, or I want to be like Gene, who can run miles and do all these things and climb a mountain in a single breath. I want to do all that. I want to be like Gene. That's all thought. That's all manipulation. It's all attempting to control. It's all coming from cognition. It's all coming from thought, what I think Gene does, what I think I want to do. And I don't think any of that is reliable. You may get into space and still find that it's similar, but I don't know until I get into a place of peace and operate from there, whether it's similar or not. Does that make sense? So, and I can use myself in terms of behavior as an example time and time again, because I'm learning more about myself and I'm changing my behavior. When I was looking for a job, I don't want to drive to a job because I know I don't like that feeling. I don't like the feeling of using gas. I don't like the feeling of being in traffic and driving with people who are wildly unconscious. I just don't like it. I don't enjoy it. Will I do it if I have to? Yes. and I'll do it peacefully with my practice engaged the best I can. But I've learned I don't really want to. I wrote that report for Mobivax about their water because every time I picked up that water bottle, I was present. Every time I put that water bottle up to my mouth, I was mindful. And every time I threw that bottle in the trash can, whether it was the recycle bin or not, I was deliberately intending the point of my attention, and those actions did not feel good. Without thought, without comparing and contrasting and manipulating and attempting to control, it just didn't feel good to be treating something like that. And so my behavior changes based on that. Does that make me perfect? No. The other day, this girl starts talking to me, and by the other day, I don't mean yesterday or the day before, but somebody starts giving me attention. That's a part of my old pattern to just, oh, hey, you want to give me attention? I'm Ernest. Nice to meet you. That's an old pattern. It doesn't benefit me. It's ego. Oh, Ernest, you like my story. You like how I look. You like how I talk. Okay, I like that too. And now before you know it, I'm acting unconsciously from patterns. Or I'm paying attention to the present moment. And the moment I start to go into that ego, I'm like, that doesn't feel good. So I'm going to say, thank you. I'm going to go and do something different. I appreciate your compliments. They're very kind. And I got to go. Best for me just to get out of the situation now because it's not serving me. That is an example of behavioral change with this practice. Very, very important. But again, it's definitely not something I would start talking about in the beginning. I will say though, let's say Jerry is in a situation, with her boss, or she's in a job and she feels like she needs to change it now. The most I would recommend is the rule of three and the three-strike rule in those situations. I still don't recommend controlling and manipulating. The closest to that, and it's not that, is a very profound redirection. Does that make sense? If you have a behavior that you want to change right away, for whatever reason, I'm not going to judge you. Maybe Gene tells people to shut up. He's been telling people to shut up for 30 years. And he's like, Ernest, I get it. This will change on its own if I let it. I want it to change now. Well, I don't recommend this necessarily, but Gene, what you must do in that situation, according to this practice, is use your rule of three, maybe even physically redirect your body, go do something else. You'll probably need a mantra. You'll probably need an object of power to remind you. You might even need to write your mantra down to make sure that you don't forget it when you need it the most. And you'll need to redirect your energy away from that activity. And it might feel a little bit like force, because it is a little bit. But again, we're looking for balance. If you didn't have any type of tension, you wouldn't be able to stand. Your heart is going from a constant state of tense to relaxed, tense to relax, tense to relax, and it creates balance. It creates a third thing called life. Does that make sense? And so that's what all of this is about. If I had to boil down this practice, it is to find synergy. It is to find a balance between opposites to achieve a type of personal power that we can create, we can grow, we can thrive, we can learn, we can collaborate, we can get along in ways that we never have before as a human species. Because we're at the top of the food chain, let's evolve our minds now. We're not struggling for food and shelter, or we shouldn't be at least. Let's start evolving our mind. Let's start learning more. Let's start producing more art. Let's start producing more creative architecture and just fun things that we want to create because we want to create it. Maybe Gene just wants to sit. He just wants to be a master of sitting. I'm not going to call him lazy. I'm not going to say, well, you need to get out there and create a Fortune 500 company. Who am I? Maybe Gene just wants to sit. And in the world that I envision, that would be perfectly okay. He will contribute to the world in a way of sitting. And then maybe people who can't sit down, they'll come to Gene. They'll be like, I have trouble sitting. And Gene will say, this is what I do to find a restful seat. And then before you know it, we're all contributing to society in our own unique way. rather than trying to replicate everybody else's results, which is wildly erroneous. You cannot replicate my results because you don't have my life, but you can create your own result of engaging, activating spirit, connecting to spirit, flowing with spirit, and operating from a place of spirit, energy body. And sometimes it might get clunky, especially if you have a strong resistance to something or a strong attachment to something. And that's where the destroyers will come in. And that's a different book. The biological destroyer, you're blinded by food. That's because that destroyer is ruling you. You're like a puppet to that destroyer. Oh, you're addicted to sex. You can't, everything is a mating ritual in your life experience. That's the biological destroyer. Does that make sense? And the destroyers are being fed by unconsciousness, because if Gene isn't being present and mindful, where's all his actions and behaviors coming from? It's that binary. All right. Any other questions, comments, or concerns? I think that's a pretty good one for today. All right. I will title this one. Should I title it like behavioral change, adapting? I don't know. I'll title it something. I think the date is the most. I don't know if you noticed, Gene, but I'm doing my best to maintain consistency with how I label things. And I've been doing it. Like 15 videos in a row or so are all labeled very similarly. Our minds like organization. Yeah, we like it. All right, cool. Well, I will see you guys again. What is today? Thursday. So I'll see you again on Monday. Monday, I'm going to do a Facebook Live, and you're welcome to attend. I want you to attend, in fact, because I think that Facebook Lives are more engaging when we're responding and interacting with one another. I don't want to get up on a soapbox and preach. Do you see what I mean? That's just not in me. That's not my style. That's not what I want to do. That's not in my alignment. I'm okay never making money from any of this. That's okay. That's earnest. That's me. That's in my alignment. All right. Well, I will see you again on Monday if you can make it. Keep an eye because I have a lot of things occurring. You know, I now have my job set. So now I have a schedule and availability. I'm going to start working in all of that. I'm learning from the place that I'm in. I learned about startups from the place that I came from. I learned about what not to do in a corporate environment from the place before that. I just feel like I'm putting this all together and it's all going to equal something really cool in the end. In the end, I don't know what that means. It's going to look really cool as it continues to go along. There is no end. Did you see that? Did you see me do it? That's a really good example, isn't it? That didn't feel good, Donna. The way that I said that just didn't feel like it was quite in alignment. And I'm practicing so I could feel that. And then I reworded it. I'm just like, oh no, wait a second. There's not an end. There's no end. And then so I modify my language, make a small adjustment, and then continue to go. If I was unconscious and I wasn't paying attention to my energy body and the feeling of my spirit, I might have just said that. And it could have been contradictory to other things that I've said in the past. And then before you know it, Gene wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's like, wait a second. What did Ernest say? That's a contradiction. Because I would have done that. I do believe that one of the reasons I organize things so well is because I am an amazing devil's advocate. Like I'll play both sides because I'm not here to just cling to one side because I think it's better. No, I look at these things from a variety of different perspectives.
Yeah, early in my practice, long before I met you in this group, I read something that resonated with me, and it had to do with the power of your words. And again, not putting too much emphasis on words or declaring war on them, but it was early in my practice. So just the awareness of my words was something new. And it was affirming things that I really no longer want to be in my experience anymore. So if I say, this is not an example of me, but I'll just give it. I'm shy. I don't do that. I'm shy. I'm really not the opposite of shy, but if I'm shy, I really don't do stuff like that. I hear myself say it, and that's an affirmation that I don't want to make. It may have been true to my experience up until this point. Every day that I could recall in my life, it may be a true statement, a valid statement, but it's not one that I want to affirm for my future. Whether it changes in this moment, or whether it changes over time, or whether it magically disappears, I want to allow for the possibility of that to happen. So I would stop myself mid-sentence and say, I have been shy. And the person listening to me doesn't notice the difference at all. I'm still able to tell my story by putting it in the past tense, but what I'm telling myself is, you are changing this just in your awareness of it. And how much it changes, or whether it's gone, or whether it's going to take years, none of that matters. It just matters that I noticed it, and I'm going to change it and allow for the possibility for it to be different. And it will be because of my awareness of it.
Precisely. And so, and then I wrote that down there. That's cognitive attention training, the ability to be present and mindful enough to observe your own thought. If you're doing the practice, now we won't judge it, so there's other aspects to it, but cognitive attention is being able to be aware of your own cognition as it happens, and 9 out of 10 human beings are not aware of their own thoughts as they occur.
Yes, Eugene began his question with you is, I know it's a control thing. This thing with my friend, I know it's a control thing. I feel a responsibility to fix it, and I don't know how to fix it, and it's causing me suffering. Just that awareness alone is a step towards you modifying your behavior in some way, because you're aware that it's a control issue. You're aware that it's something that you do, and you're aware that you can't change it. So now what am I going to do in its place? Some kind of practice. And so you have, right in that moment, changed it in some way.
Right. Yep. And then so, I'm telling somebody that, I'm healing, I'm learning to heal myself. And then as I say that, I'm like, wait a second. No, I don't. It's just something about that. The way I'm using the word, it just doesn't resonate. And I'm not declaring war on it. I'm not telling Gene what he should say, but instead I'm going to say I grow, because I see plants grow. I see animals grow. I see the earth grow. And sometimes there's pains in that growing. And I think that's okay. I see that as a universal dynamic, that sometimes as things grow, it can be a little bit painful, but it can also be wildly rewarding when we grow enough that now we can take in more sunshine. We've grown a little bit taller than the rest of the weeds, and now we can take in some sunshine and we benefit from that growth. And there may have been some pain involved. So now I look at things as, I'm not healing. I'm not healing. If I cut myself, that needs to heal. That's how I'm using the word. I'm not constantly healing because I'm not constantly sick. That's a weird way of looking at the world, I think. No, I'm growing. I'm constantly growing. I'm constantly watering my roots. I'm constantly reaching to the sunshine, and I'm constantly growing and evolving and changing and becoming more fluid, more dynamic. And there's this type of strength in that. When things are aligned, when the body is aligned, it's stronger. When it's misaligned, it's going to be more easy for it to collapse and break and things. Same principle. So the more that my mind is aligned, the more that my body and spirit is aligned, I'm much stronger, in a manner of speaking. Does that make sense? That's an example of, I don't like the way that I was saying the word heal. And so because I'm doing my practice, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't resonate. Now I use the word grow. And someone would say, Ernest, that's just semantics. For you, yes. For you, that's just an issue of semantics. For me, how do these words feel? Is it really describing how I feel and the direction of the energy or not? And heal is not. This is just not feeling right. Feels like we're using these words in different ways interchangeably. Gene broke his leg, it needs to heal. Gene broke his spirit. No, you didn't. It's not broken. You can't heal your spirit. What are you talking about? It's not broken. It's not damaged. It's spirit. It's beyond your ability to damage. It may not be flowing, but
sometimes
yes,
words are like really limiting, like healing. I'm healing. It kind of limits you from growing. Or like with Donna's example, I am an example of somebody that used to associate themselves as being shy. And that association limited me because I felt like I was less, I didn't feel like I could do certain things because I was shy. And that association itself is very limiting. So the words can be so powerful in how we act upon things and how we don't grow as a result.
Yep. Makes perfect sense to me. All right, well, I'm going to get out of here. Just as a heads up, I am going to be doing, my one-on-one sessions are still active. I'm going to lower the price a little bit and fix my calendar because I have more time. I'm going to do movement. So I want to do movement one-on-ones. The way that I want to do movement is just follow me, and I'm going to make the next 30 minutes better for you. And we're going to breathe, and we're going to, do our practice, but I'm not going to talk it out. We're going to do it together, and I'm going to help you feel better. I want to have a service that I offer that is just about feeling better now. Mindfulness might not, some of our mindfulness stuff, it just, we're talking and we're learning, and that's a different thing. But if Donna's like, you know what, Ernest, I feel really tense. I want to do a movement session with you. Tell me where you're tense. Let's move it out. Let's get some of that out. Let's get to feeling better. And that's what that 30-minute session will be for. So I'm going to have movement sessions. I'm going to have my typical mindfulness session, and then I'm going to have a variety of other like little quirky things if you really want to learn these, very specific things, if that makes sense. You want to learn dream walking? Okay. If you think you want to learn that and you think that this is the right time for you and you're ready to ask the questions, let's get into it. Let's start dream walking. Let's start if you just want it more basic, let's just dedicate more to our mindfulness practice, and that would be a general mindfulness session. Book is going to be done very soon because I have like 2 or 3 more chapters in Grammarly, maybe a few more, I don't know, but it's going very quickly now. I'm still doing school and things, so that is, one of the reasons for I don't want to get behind in school and everything else that I'm doing. So everything is just kind of slow, but it is occurring. All right, so if you'd like to sign up for one-on-ones, I'm going to create a dynamic where if you come to the group studies, if you come to the free things, you can earn free time with me. So like, Jean, Donna, everybody, you guys have all been here. You're coming every single day. Eventually, I'll just message you and say, you have a 30-minute voucher. You can just schedule time with me, 30 minutes, let's talk. If you're pay me with my time, with your time. If you're willing to come to the sessions and you're willing to come to these, if somebody I don't know wants to talk about something, that's $75 an hour. Like, I don't know you. I don't want to get into how do I manifest a Ferrari or how do I control my partner? And it's like, oh, here we go. So yeah. All right. Well, I will see you again on Monday. I thank you for hanging out, and I will put this up to rewatch really soon. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. All right. Thanks, guys. See you again soon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.